My name is February. I reshaped this landscape. My hands wove the patterns of the vineyards. My feet pressed the grapes, and I was paid with the wine. I carry alcohol-fetal syndrome children on my back. My name is February. I still march on the eve of December 1st. I walk the cobblestones of this city. When I cry out in desperation, remember the emancipation of the slaves. My name is February. 200 years after the Sayose, I was given the vote. They said I was free. But don't you see how often I am submerged, weighed down? I'm the sunken, the soiled, forgotten, and yet memory will not leave me. My name is February. I shall be resurrected, brought to the surface, unshackled, unchained, unashamed. My name is February.
So in 1834, the Act is implemented across the empire. From that date, the 1st of December, in the case of the Cape Colony, there is no longer a slave. From the point of view of lived experience, from day-to-day life, there's little that changes. For the next 4 years, the enslaved were required to work as apprentices. And so many stayed in the same place, working for the person who had been a slave owner, continued to do the kind of work that they had done as enslaved people. And so that 4-year apprenticeship continues until 1838. I think they're one of 3 things that the newly emancipated could do. They could move off the farms that they had worked on, out of the master's households, and to Cape Town. A second one of the options was to move onto the mission stations. The third choice, and I can't say how many people would have chosen this, was to remain in place.
On the economic level, of course, the slaves were never given, or the ex-slaves were never given any economic compensation for being enslaved. In fact, economic compensation was given to the slave owners. They were compensated for the loss of their property. The slaves were never compensated for having been slaves.
So we know also the fact that when the slaves were then emancipated, more than 1,000 slaves came to Genadendal. The missionaries heard about it, and there came a fear in their hearts. What are we going to do when great numbers will come and settle here? And then they wrote to Germany and asked Germany, please, can't you send more missionaries? And then the answer came, unfortunately, we won't be able to do that. But what we suggest is that you start an institution for tertiary education. And in September 1838, the very first teachers' training college was erected in South Africa. We also know that the teachers trained were then sent not only to the schools of Genadendal, but elsewhere. I worked at the museum for about 50 years as a curator and director of the museum. I have about 30,000 artifacts, and the only museum declared as National Cultural Treasure. My wife would always ask me, but Isaac, why so late? Then I would tell her, man, it is my slave genes. I can't wish it away, I can't run away from it. It is in my blood.
Genadendal oorbevolk geraak het die missionaries ander plekke besigtig. En omdat Elim 1824 gestig is, ons was die enigste plekkie hier in die area waar daar 'n meel opgerig was. Die omliggende boere het almal hulle koring en haver na hierdie meel toe gebring met hulle slawewerkers saam. En hulle het vertroud geraak met die gemeenskap. Hulle het ons dienste elke Sondag bygewoon. So in 1838 wat hulle nou finaal vrygelaat was, het die meerderheid van hulle Elim toe gekom. En dis waarom ons die vanne van die maan tot vandag toe hier in Elim kry. En volgens die doopregisters het ek opgekyk, die meerderheid vanne wat gekom het, was van Mosambik, Madagaskar, Batavië en een of twee van Portugal. Slawe het al hierdie geboue in hierdie kerkwerf. Ons het opgegroei in die reëls en regulasies van Elim. Sien, want hoekom dit is 'n kerkskool gewees, ten minste nou nog. Ons mense is baie vir ons kerk. Wat Elim ontstaan het elke inwoner wat hier was 'n erf gekry in Kerkstraat. En met die erf het jy 'n stukkie tuingrond gekry wat jy moet bewerk het. Jy moet die grond self mak gemaak het en na 'n jaar of 2 dan betaal jy 'n penning aan die Heer. Die missionaries het oorgekom van Duitsland en die doel van die sendelinge was om die mense die woord te kom leer en verskillende werksgeleenthede. Soos byvoorbeeld by ons is dit goeie vakmanskappe, so die riedakdekkers, goeie skrynwerkers. Die mense was hardwerkend. Mense het daai tyd in ruil, het hulle honders, hulle het alles hier gehad. Omdat hier nie werk was, behoorlik werk was vir die mense in die Elim, moet hulle uitgegaan het, in die stadslewe of iewers anders. Maar ek kan vir jou sê, 'n Elimer kom terug. Hulle het 'n liefde vir hierdie plek. Ons ken van help mekaar.
At the foot of Simon's mountain, our ancestors once dwelt. They put their faith in the living fountain, and so Peniel became the well. Back in the 1800s, you know, this little town Peniel was first called Papiermolen. And that was the farm who had already 2 women and 5 men as slaves, and also they had like 7 children here. And it was owned by Adrian de Villiers. But there's another portion of Papiermolen that was owned by Abraham Maree. He had 26 slaves. And then where Antistini lives, that's on the right-hand side of Peniel, that's Johannesdal. There was only 1 slave there, Valentine. So Peniel was very much entwined into slavery at that time. When emancipation started in 1834, these 3 farmers, Retief and de Villiers and Haupt, they acquired this piece of land. So they needed a place to put the verwaarloosde heiden. That words were in the centenary book of Peniel. To see the legacies of the former slaves, you must have a look at our church. They thought that our people didn't believe in God, and they want to establish a church where they could practice and convert into Christianity. And also, you could look at the land that was given to the freed slave. He got a piece of land to build a house, and he got a piece of land for vegetables and fruit to grow there. And that sustained that freed slave all of his life till today. There was Mr. Stegman, Georg Stegman. He was the one that came here, and he did all the paperwork. He sent his brother's child, Frederick Stegman. He was only 18, came here, and he stayed all of his life in Pinyal, almost 67 years. He died in 1910. The people loved him very much. He put a lot of rules in place for Pinyal. There's only been one church. And number 2, no wine to be sold here. Emancipation was a good thing. Of Stegman saying that through education you'll be free of slavery. So today we have a lot of doctors, we have professors, we have lawyers, and at one time we had 22 principals all around Pinyal in the schools here. There's a lot of people that wants to forget about slavery because of social status. I like to use my slave history because I want people to know that I really come from the slaves. And like my husband, whose surname is the Novembers, that he could trace his family's history. Pinyal is very important to the Torres Strait because when you come from Cape Town and you come through Stellenbosch, then you go over the mountain and then you come to this beautiful valley around the mountain, Simonsburg Mountain, and then you come to Pinyal. Nobody stops here because we don't have wine to sell to the tourists. But I want to invite the people to come to Pinyal to experience not the wine route, but come experience the slave route. So when you come to Pinyal, we give you hospitality. We like to tell you our heritage and how we prospered in life.
And so where we are at the moment at a wine farm, my family is linked to this place. But when I arrive at a place like this, I'm often seen as an uninvited guest. I'm related to the slaves on this farm, and I'm also related to the slave owners on this farm. So I find myself in a unique space where I can't actually necessarily play overlord or victim. I'm both of those, because it's very easy to buy into a manifesto and into a slogan. But in a sense, I hope to confront people and disturb people and disturb their predetermined idea of either where we come from or where we are going. In the 19th century, this farm was owned by the Tennyson family. They owned an ancestor of mine called Efa. Efa, when she was 15 years old, was sold to the Morkel family of De Bos. The Morkel family owned my other female ancestor called Kandaza, and she then had a relationship with the farmer Morkel, and she had a son called Abraham. South African history, supposedly the liberated history, is always about it being relatively pure on one side or the other, black or white, not anything in between. I am a melting point, but it's not only because of genetics, but also because of perspectives, and also because I am an owner and someone who was owned. And it's a group of our family that decided, in fact, to just visit some of the sites. I did not really say that we were family. I said I just wanted to visit an estate where one of my ancestors had been a slave. And then I mentioned who it was, and then he said of his own accord, I know we are family. But one pertinent moment arrived when Klein Sarel then says, he's got the original slave bell here. He goes inside the house and he brings out a bell, which actually in Latin still says, fetch it in Amsterdam. And 1723 is when it was cast. And he said this was the original bell that hung on the farm. And so that would have been the bell that actually announced the work times of my ancestor, but also would have announced her emancipation. So it was a very poignant moment for us to ring the bell. To ring in the ear and remember slavery.
We know from historical records that there were parades and marches through the city streets of Cape Town to celebrate the end of slavery. There are documents and there are etchings and paintings that show us troops of people marching in their finest clothes with musical instruments, flying flags, celebrating the end of this horrible institution. Slavery in Cape Town relied on slaves who came primarily from 4 different regions of the world, from what is now Malaysia, what is now Indonesia, the island of Madagascar, and East Africa. Their languages, their cuisines, and their music blended together.
It's about 1670, 1680, when the first exiles were brought here. And they came from an Islamic culture. So they brought that music, that rhythm, that fuse with the Dutch. And today you find them singing this liedjes where Hafsa, and of course it has kind of an Islamic lilt where the melody is kind of so it comes from that tradition. That's the exciting thing about our culture, and you can only find it here in the Western Cape.
It's basically drums and saxophones and trumpets. It's like almost avant-garde music because they have these huge bass drums. There's about three bass drums and snares and trumpets and there's each playing different melodies. So it's really strange, and it's like da 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 da.
But when the British banned slavery, I forgot the exact date, 18-something, they captured a slave ship off the coast of Angola and diverted the ship to Cape Town, where they released the slaves. So amongst that slave population were quite a number of musicians. When I went into exile in the United States and I first heard Brazilian music, the samba, I said, wait a minute. There's a kinship between this rhythm and the rhythm that we play in Cape Town, which is very similar, what we call Ghoema.
It has certain fundamentals. I mean, that drum is unique to Cape Town. The Ghoema drum we should build a statue to the Ghoema drum, I think.